I've always loved the adventure, mystery, and far horizons of long-distance trails. Almost 50 years ago, I dreamed of a new route from the Continental Divide to the Pacific Ocean. I want to describe for you that vision, its eventual success, and my sense of the Pacific Northwest Trail's next half-century. First, a little background. In 1968, Congress created the National Trail System and specified how new national scenic trails could be added. 2 years later, America still had only 2 such official long-distance trails. That seemed like an invitation to 25-year-old me to create the third. I pored over maps, consulted land managers, and spent my summers learning the country. In 1974, I introduced my PNT wilderness route to the public via an article in the then-new Backpacker magazine. I wrote of a passionate walker's trail full of wilderness adventure. Next, I persuaded a Seattle congressman to introduce a bill to order a federal study of the feasibility and desirability of creating the Pacific Northwest Trail. People often ask me about the PNT's origins. How does anybody initiate a 1,200-mile trail from scratch, they say. Sometimes I show them a copy of our original bill, as I'm doing in this photo. That usually fails to satisfy questioners because our foundation document merely lists 7 national forests, 3 national parks, and other areas in Montana, Idaho, and Washington. The bill's dry language disappoints. People want to know where my over-the-top concept came from and what kind of person envisioned a trail across all that magnificent country. Fellow New Englander Ralph Waldo Emerson once said that, properly speaking, all history is biography, and the history of this project owes a lot to my having grown up in Rhode Island, only 50 miles from Walden Pond. I breathed Henry David Thoreau's same air, and at a young age I became a devoted admirer of his life and writings. To this day, I still live only 7 miles from Walden Pond. During the 1960s, as a Georgetown student in Washington, D.C., I walked many parts of the Appalachian Trail. In 1968, I thru-hiked 250 miles of the north-south Cascade Crest Trail in Washington State. And in 1969, I rambled much of the then-new volunteer-developed Cleveland Way in Yorkshire. Those experiences greatly influenced what I wanted to include in an ideal trail. As a very young man, I hoped to join the diplomatic service. Here's a picture of me, age 20, as a clean-cut, pressed-pants exchange student in northern Cameroon, West Africa. Without understanding myself very well, I pictured a future life in a conventional bureaucracy. This next picture shows how poorly that panned out. Here I am later, looking like what we affectionately call hiker trash. So much for my ambassadorial career. I went over completely to the environment, wilderness, and trails. 1977 was a banner year for the Pacific Northwest Trail. Friends and I formed a nonprofit group modeled on the Appalachian Trail Conference. Congress had passed our trail bill, and we even had our first 5 successful PNT thru-hikers. 2 of those throughs are standing at the right side of this picture. That's Janet Garner and Rex Bakel, who not only hiked our sketchy 1,200-mile route, but also worked with local members in Bonners Ferry, Idaho, to erect the world's first Pacific Northwest Trail sign. A local lumber yard donated that beautiful slab of western red cedar. As we stood on the banks of the Kootenai River, our sign's directions were short on specifics but long on determination. During the next 5 years, we continued the painstaking process of perfecting our route, recruiting local members, and welcoming new hikers. I even interviewed old-timers for a book of PNT oral history called River Pigs and Cayuses. We published our first book-length PNT guide to the route that we had cobbled together from existing trails and little-used roads. But the truth was that we had never built any new sections. And, even worse, The federal government's study of the PNT's feasibility and desirability strongly recommended against any further federal interest. Among other points, they claimed that the trail would be far too costly to build. That would have been the end of it, but my friends and I were not quitters. We decided to build an audacious demonstration project on state land north of Seattle. The federal report had said the PNT was too expensive, so we decided to build it for free. In November 1983, our little band of hikers gathered in the deep woods above Samish Bay to make PNT history. That's our president, a Port of Seattle engineer on the left, and his wife on the right. Behind her is a 24-year-old cartographer who'd recently volunteered his assistance. There in the middle is Max Eckenberg, a retired Boeing engineer who always boasted that he'd designed the crapper in the B-17. Max had learned trail design and construction in the 3 Cs during the Great Depression, and he took to our improbable project like a duck to water. Samish Bay is where a PNT hiker who's walked from Montana will first encounter salt water. Throughout 1983 and 1984, we designed our new section, and just in time, the British Army came to help us with the construction. After having read about the Pacific Crest Trail in National Geographic magazine, an English officer mistakenly wrote to me asking how he and his men could assist. I responded that I had lots of leadership opportunities for him at Samish Bay. Unfortunately, a decade later, we still had not made a dent in our number one problem. The gold standard for an American long-distance trail is inclusion in the National Trail System, an almost impossible goal for even large, well-organized groups. And though our Director of Trail Operations had masterfully lined up local support, by 2008 we had just about run out of time and resources. Finally, I asked my friend Tom Gilbert, superintendent of the North Country National Scenic Trail, to draft language that our House and Senate allies could add to a then-pending omnibus bill. He did so, but confided to me, "Ron, you don't have a chance." That was the prevailing view in March 2009, when C-SPAN broadcast the clerk of the House of Representatives tallying the omnibus bill's yeas and nays. Tears flooded my eyes when the result was announced, and our long struggle was over. Or was it merely just beginning? What would be our new vision? Here's my 10 essentials list about what to do next. I'll put the most important part first. Throughout our long history, our motto has always been, stay high for the views. The PNT provides other types of experience too, but anyone hiking our trail should expect to receive maximum wilderness magic. By definition, National Scenic Trails provide superb recreational experiences. But our route begins its next 50 years with many gaps. This was and is a common situation with all National Scenic Trails. It's a major national challenge. Luckily, in our case, we have at least one example of how to move forward. Recently, near Oroville, Washington, we worked with backcountry horsemen and other volunteer groups, local businesses, and concerned officials to create a needed PNT trailhead. Let's use that example to fill in all of our gaps. The PNT exists within a national context of trails leadership. So many of our challenges have been faced before in other parts of the country, especially on the Appalachian Trail. By the way, that's me on the right in this long ago self-portrait in northern Georgia. In the mid-1980s, the already venerable Appalachian Trail faced a crisis. The title of their seminal book, A Time to Be Bold, points at a way forward for us. Common expectations exist for the governance of long-distance trail nonprofits. Here, for instance, is a list of board member qualifications that I copied from the North Country Trail Association. As one would expect, The list includes a heavy emphasis on fundraising. I met these hikers at Holman Pass, just south of the Canadian border. I recognized them immediately as members of our tribe. They were funny, charming, and would make good trail companions or work trip volunteers. But that's not enough to qualify them for our board of directors. Our requirements must match those of the ATC, PCTA, and NCTA. Let's seek out and nurture highly successful PNT fans in business, higher education, the media, etc. As a group, our most valuable possession besides national trail status is our detailed understanding of the PNT's route. We've worked it out over many decades, and the way we disseminate that information continues to change. Back in 1980, our 8-page guidebook, shown on the left, was state-of-the-art for our new trail. In 2001, the 400-page guidebook on the right was so detailed that a famous thru-hiker once described it as a treasure map. Inevitably, other individuals and groups will seek to redefine the PNT according to their own lights. To guard against that, our own PNTA maps must remain the sole arbiter of what is and is not the trail. By the way, ever since 1984, we've promoted both a practical route that people can hike immediately and an ideal route that we'll work toward building. In other words, if we had the public access and infrastructure in place for the ideal route, we'd show only its line. But that's still not the case. So our evolving practical route will continue to direct hikers where they can immediately go to enjoy the trail until that ideal PNT materializes. Long-distance trails are often rich resources of oral and written history. Place names and structures remind us of those who have passed before us. For instance, this Pasayten picture shows the World War I tungsten mine bunkhouse and the bathtub that Paul Loudon's donkey, Jack, carried into the country a century ago. Such things deserve to be preserved for future hikers. We also need a repository for our own exciting history. This picture shows the Appalachian Trail Museum located on the AT midway between Georgia and Maine. We need a headquarters office and a place where we can interact with the public. The Long Trails Visitor Center is a prime example. The right kind of headquarters building can have a profound sense of connection with the hiking public. When Russ Myers finished his years of AT section hiking, he chose to end in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, at the AT's iconic stone building. The Pacific Northwest Trail Association has a long history of educating and motivating young people via trail maintenance and construction. Youth engagement is the best way we have to connect with the next generations of hikers. From the beginning, I imbued the Pacific Northwest Trail with the volunteer tradition of the Appalachian Trail. Without our hikers, maintainers, and trail angels, the PNT would exist in name only. I'm especially fond of the Crest Trail Association's tradition of handing out a medallion to everyone who's completed the PCT. If I could afford it, I would create and finance such medallions myself, following the former example of Eric Ryback. As of 2018, we have wooden plaques for finishers. This 1982 classic photo shows PNT hikers at the Polebridge Hostel near Glacier National Park. We have lost track of all 4 of these people, including the then famous Rick Mr. Risk Russin. In this 1979 picture, Janet Garner and I are interviewing Colonel Pete Langstaff and his companion John Molohan at Port Townsend during their successful thru-hike. Multimedia recordings of people's trail experiences are an important part of PNT history. I hope that we will find ways to recognize trail maintainers for their contributions to the PNT. This, by the way, is Tim Youngbluth, who annually edits the PNT Digest. A few years ago, thru hiker John Waldrop walked into Republic, Washington to pick up his food drop at the post office. Postmaster Artie McRae handed it to him with a hint that she would like to become a future Republic Trail Angel. Since then, she's hosted many of our hikers. She and our other trail angels are part of the life and soul of the trail. Some of our hikers are more famous than others, but we are all family and deserve recognition. This, by the way, is Andrew Skurka, who first hiked the PNT in 2005 on his thru hike from the mouth of the St. Lawrence River. In this picture, he is pouring his tiny vial of Atlantic Ocean water onto his head at Cape Alava. Finally, my 10th vision for the future of the PNT concerns our role in the broader national trail system. What kind of a system is it where most of its 11 national scenic trails are incomplete, and they are not linked within a meaningful grid? America is missing an opportunity to market these trails more comprehensively in the manner of Europe's GR trails. An exciting new way to think of the PNT is as the western terminus of America's transcontinental route. That's not as far-fetched as it may seem. Note on this map that the sea-to-sea already exists except for two gaps. First, the future Big Sky Trail in Montana, and second, the Addison County NCT extension in Vermont. To prove sea-to-sea's viability, Andrew Skurka thru-hiked it during 11 months from 2004 to 2005. The Pacific Northwest Trail Association welcomed him to Cape Alava with a tumultuous celebration. Andrew's 7,700-mile feat matched the large-scale vision that underlay the PNT's first 50 years. Look at the joy on our faces in this photograph. That's the spirit that gives me hope about completing and protecting the Pacific Northwest Trail during our second 50 years. Thank you for your attention. Every year, people like you discover the Pacific Northwest Trail. It speaks to our shared sense of adventure and respect for nature. Please join us at pnt.org. I'd love to meet you out along the trail.